So for the chapter 18 questions, you have to pretty much put the chapter in a sequence. Something is going to happen at the beginning, middle, and end of the chapter, and it's your guys' job to put it in the correct order. So, super simple. We're jumping right in, because I gotta hop on to the social hour that's happening in 20 minutes. So, here we go. Chapter 18. Excuse me. A raven showed up within minutes, then 2, 3, 4 others. Raymond turned to the business of skinning and butchering. I got busy with the axe, starting a fire at the edge of the trees and building a lean-to under a sheltering spruce. The ravens ate gluttonously from the entrails and the organs, flying off just before dark. I heaped dead branches onto the fire and lit up the whole area. I hadn't noticed the wolves since they scattered, but now, back in the trees, their eyes reflected the firelight. Raymond chose the tongue first, and this time I tried it too, in memory of Johnny. Fat from our steaks, roasting on sticks, was sizzling and dripping into the fire. We ate our fill. When we were done, we covered all the meat with snow to keep down the scent, then piled heavy branches on top of that. Do we still want to build the brush teepee right here by the moose? I asked, looking into the darkness for the eyes of the wolves, but not seeing them. We've got to protect this meat, Raymond said. That comes first. We'll have to build a cache, get all the meat up high where animals can't get it. We already have a cache at the cabin, I pointed out. How far could the cabin be? It's at the other end of the valley, maybe 15 kilometers. That would be a long way to pull that meat on the toboggan, that's for sure. And it would take way more than one load. I let out a whoop. Think of how warm we would be back in the cabin for the rest of the winter. Man, that would be Fat City. From that moment, we could think of nothing but how to get ourselves back into the cabin. We'd have to split up, we decided. One of us would pull half the meat to the cabin while the other stayed to protect the rest. Without question, we needed every bit of the meat to carry us through until breakup in May. I'll make the first run, I said. Gotta keep in training since I'm not playing football this year. I could see he was going to let me have it. Through unbroken snow, the first run was going to be brutal, and I had more brute strength. You take the fire starter, Raymond said. I can keep the fire going here without it. We only have one axe. You need it, and I need it. I've got the bow saw to make firewood. Everyone says wolves don't attack people, but in case they do while you're hauling all that meat, you better have that axe along. In the morning, we wrapped half the meat in the blue tarp and secured it on the toboggan, then tied the camp gear I would need on top of that. Raymond wouldn't let me go without squeezing Johnny's moccasins into the pack sack on my back. So then he hung the fire starter from my neck and said, "See you later, buddy." I started to pull, and he added, "Watch out for overflow, and don't keep going if no animals are moving in the woods. If it gets that cold, stop and make camp." "Hey, you keep that fire burning," I called over my shoulder. It was as bad as we guessed it would be, pulling that toboggan, but it had to be done. Slow and steady, I kept telling myself. Just keep leaning into that pull rope. Grab a root and dig, as my father always liked to say. Every step, you're one step closer. By midday, the mercury was down in the bulb, 60 degrees below zero, as low as the thermometer could read. I could feel the cold air sinking down out of the mountains and spreading out on the valley floor, feeling very much like a substance, though it couldn't be seen. Was this the cold Raymond had predicted from the coppery sun? How cold was it getting, I wondered. Was it even colder than 60 below? Should I turn back? I looked behind me and saw a trail of fog that my breath had made. Give up what I accomplished getting this far? The sooner we could move back into the cabin, the better. I was thinking with my legs instead of my brain. I was wearing almost everything I had, including the face mask. With the cap pulled over the mask and the stiff hair of the Parker ruff ringing in my face, I knew I didn't have a chance of hearing wolves sneaking up on me, so I kept looking back and all around. I never saw them. I trudged forward, using the bald mountain for my reference point. For a brief time, the sun rose above my reference point. For, oh, sorry. For a brief time, the sun rose above it. Twice, I needed to leave the toboggan and climb high enough to catch a glimpse of the gates of the canyon on the downstream end of the Nahanni's run through Deadman Valley. That's where the cabin sat. 6 or 7 miles to go. In the afternoon twilight, the cold deepened. The trees were freezing and splitting, and the stream beds made an eerie drumming spang that resounded away under the ice. With the weight I was pulling, I was making such poor time I was reluctant to think about quitting with the daylight. I remembered that I should be looking around to see if animals were still moving in the woods. I hadn't seen any squirrels that I could recall, or rabbits, or fresh tracks of any kind. But then, I told myself, I hadn't been looking. If I did stop, I would face all the struggle of making camp. No, I was doing okay. I was going so slow. I should put in another hour or two. That way I wouldn't have to spend 2 nights out before I got to the cabin. When the twilight was gone, I kept pulling by the surreal, blazing cold white light of the full moon, in and out of the long timber shadows. Far off, 2 owls were talking across the frozen stillness. The way sound carried in the cold, I wondered how far apart they might be. I just kept going, though I didn't realize it. I was half frozen, too cold to think. If I just kept moving, I told myself, I'd stay warm enough. At one point, I came off a ridge and began to cross a stream bottom. The air was so cold down there, it felt like I was wading in cold water, even if I wasn't. But in another couple of seconds, I realized that was exactly what I was doing. My snowshoes sank suddenly into knee-deep slush hidden beneath the snow. The pain struck instantly in my legs. My mind came suddenly awake. I was in serious, serious trouble. I waded out of the overflow, the snowshoes icing before my eyes. I jerked the toboggan around and pulled for the nearest cluster of spruce. My feet were numb already. With frozen feet, I knew I'd be dead. It would be only a matter of time. I dropped my mitts and tried to undo the frozen bindings around my boots, but I was getting nowhere with my gloves on, losing way too much time. I pulled my gloves off and tore at the icy bindings with my bare fingers. Once I was out of my snowshoes, I reached for the axe on the toboggan. I turned to the trees, slashing at dead lower limbs as fast as I could. I should have thought about putting my gloves back on, but I wasn't thinking. I only knew I couldn't lose any time. I gathered kindling, raced back to the toboggan for birch bark. My hands were freezing fast. I pulled dry socks and Johnny's moccasins from the pack sack, and then I tried to pull the fire starter free from inside my parka and under my shirt. My fingers wouldn't work. I had to hook my thumb under the cord and work it up around my head. I managed to pull the fire starter into its 2 halves. The white cube of fuel fell to the ground. At first, I thought I lost it in the snow. Then I tried to pick it up, and I couldn't. Now I realized that my fingers weren't going to be able to open my pocket knife so I could rough up the surface of the cube. I've killed myself, I thought. Do something, quick! I picked up the cube the only way I could, with my teeth. Then I knelt low over the birch bark. I chewed up the cube with my face right down to the birch bark, letting the little pieces drop in the small area as I could keep them. With hands like clubs, I managed to grip the 2 halves of the fire starter between my thumbs and palms. I showered sparks on my tinder again and again. Finally, a piece of the white stuff caught. It flamed up faithfully, and I got some birch bark over the flame. The birch bark burned hot and spread the flames. My kindling caught, and so did my small wood. I tried to warm up my hands, then realized I'd just burned my right palm. I pulled my hands away and warmed them up just enough to make them work again, then back to tearing at the laces of my boots. So, he's so cold, his hands are so frozen, that he had them so close to the fire, he didn't realize that he burned himself. That's how little feeling he had left in his hands. It's crazy. With 2 pairs of dry socks and Johnny's moccasins on my feet, and my hands back in my gloves, I grabbed up the axe and went back to slashing branches to revive the fire, which had almost gone out. Then I noticed a small standing spruce in the moonlight. I ran to it and shattered it with a few blows. I whacked it in two and dragged both pieces over the fire. The flames began to climb up through the branches. I could feel my feet again. They were nipped, but not really frostbit. I knew I'd come within a few minutes of having both of them turn to dead flesh. The night was just getting colder, but there was wood here, enough wood to keep a blazing fire going through the night. If there hadn't been all this wood, this close to where I'd gotten my feet wet, I had all the hours of the night to feed that fire and think about my mistakes, to remember my father's warnings and Raymond's, to think how stupid I'd been. The fire burned a well in the snow down to the ground. I stayed as close to the fire as I could, with the cold always attacking my back. I boiled water from melted snow. After I'd drunk my fill, I boiled another half pot, and out of curiosity, tossed the boiling water into the air. It made a great whoosh and turned into fog before it ever hit the ground. I tended to the burn on my hand. I counted myself extremely lucky to be alive. Never sleeping, I waited out the night, then pulled hard all the next day. The cabin made a beautiful sight as I hauled in at last. I fetched our ladder and shouldered all the meat up into the cache. I ate well and spent the night inside. The cabin still smelled of Wolverine, but on the present scale of things that didn't even constitute an annoyance. I kept thinking about Raymond, picturing him out there in this cold. I worried about his fire, and I worried about the wolves. The extreme cold showed no sign of letting up. In the morning, there was a 1/4 inch of frost on every nail head on the inside of the cabin door. I knew Raymond wouldn't want me to travel in these conditions. I waited one day, but the mercury never climbed out of the well in the bottom of the bowl. I knew I couldn't wait any longer to get back to him. Before light the following day, I was on my way. In my own trail to follow through broken snow, and only the camp gear on the toboggan, I made it all the way back to Raymond in one long haul. When at last I spotted his campfire, I gave a shout, and he hollered back. After 4 days of pure silence, the sound of his voice brought tears to my eyes. Raymond was indeed happy to see me. "I was afraid something happened to you," he said. "Did you keep going in that cold, or what?" I had to confess about the overflow and about everything that had happened. Seeing his face as I told it, I scared myself all over again. "That's twice," he said. "You're pretty lucky, but I think you better stay away from water from now on." Raymond had made a delicious thick soup from the hard meat of the moose with plenty of fat thrown in. We were going to take the liver and kidneys along with a second load of meat, anything that could conceivably be eaten. What was left of the heart he gave to the ravens. We waited a couple of days until it warmed up to 40 below. I undid the bandaging of my palm, on the palm of my right hand, and we took a look. It ached all the time, especially at night when I had to lie down and it wasn't doing anything. "It looks like raw meat," Raymond observed. I cleaned it with warm water, then put antiseptic salve on it, and rewrapped it with fresh gauze. "At least it's not getting infected," I said. "Maybe it's too cold to get infected." This time we could trade off pulling the toboggan. Though the trail was twice broken now, the weight made us earn every yard. Raymond wondered how I'd done it the first time, and so did I. We approached the cabin at noon the next day, the last day of January. We knew we could get by now for the rest of the winter. I said, "We're going to make it now. We're home free." That was about a minute before we found 2 of the legs of our food cache broken off, and the cache itself toppled on the ground. All the meat I had cached from the first trip was gone. Everywhere we looked, we saw the tracks of an enormous bear. Just when you think they're gonna survive, something else is happening to these poor boys. Ugh, I feel so bad for them. Oh man. Okay, so you guys can pretty much tell there's 3 things that happen. 1, 2, 3. Put them in the correct order, and that's all you have to do today. Cool. See you guys later. Bye.